The worst winds come off the Moskva River at the turn of the year, slicing between apartment blocks and rattling the icicles that hang like dull knives from balconies. Yelena Petrovna Samolyova, 67 and long retired from Directorate S of the Foreign Intelligence Service, walked the river embankment every dawn anyway. Spies, even retired ones, learn to love routine more than comfort. Patterns make the world legible. Today, 2 days before New Year's Eve, the air tasted of tin, and the snow that drifted down glittered with a peculiar prismatic sheen. Yelena paused at the rail, held out a mittened palm, and let one flake settle. At once she felt the old click in her mind, the moment when a code reveals itself not as random noise, but as deliberate arrangement. The flake's 6 arms were no ordinary dendrites. They bent at unnatural right angles, forming minute Cyrillic strokes around a central knot. She had seen such strokes once, in the margin of a battered grimoire that some Polish archivist insisted was harmless folklore. Directorate S had filed the thing away under esoterica, and Yelena had dismissed it as Cold War superstition. Now, here were the same sigils, falling by the millions onto Moscow. She tucked the flake, already melting, into a vial she carried for collecting yarn ends. Then she headed for her tram, breathing faster than the cold alone could account for. Knitting saved her after retirement. Empty hours can drown a spy accustomed to radio chatter and dead drops, so she had taken up needles to keep the hands busy and the mind calm. Yarn, unlike people, does not lie. A stitch dropped is a stitch missed. End of story. Soon she was designing lace patterns no one else could follow, swooping cables that reminded her of satellite trajectories, ribs that echoed more. When neighbours in her communal stairwell asked what she was making, she told them scarves, for whom she never specified. Back in her flat, she pulled down her magnifying visor, angled a daylight lamp over her work table, and photographed the snowflake before it vanished. Enlarged on the tablet screen, the sigils were clear. She sketched them, matched each limb to phonemes, then to numerals, her old tradecraft returning like muscle memory. What emerged horrified her. A date and a phrase. 31/12, 2359, and Morrow's Vramini, the frost of time. The flake was a spell, and the date was New Year's Eve. Someone planned to freeze more than streets and fountains. Yelena opened her yarn chest. If snowflakes carried the incantation, then perhaps yarn could carry its inversion. She chose 6 skeins, ice blue, midnight, and crimson for emphasis, with a pair of carbon fibre needles silent. Quicker than metal she cast on 216 stitches, one for each second between 23:59 and 0 seconds, and 0:02 and 36 seconds. The window when the Kremlin chimes rang 12 times, yet clocks still argued about yesterday and tomorrow. She would knit a key, row by row, embedding the counterspell in cables and slip stitches. Knitting, as cryptography, has advantages. Every knit or purl is a bit, every twist a parity check. But yarn also remembers intent. Witches in old Russia knitted storms into fishermen's nets. Yelena worked through the morning, the afternoon, the cusp of evening, when the city's golden domes tinted violet. When her wrists cramped, she brewed black tea with lemon and honey, then continued, counting stitches under her breath like rosary beads. She finished the scarf's central panel by midnight. The pattern looked chaotic to untrained eyes. Zigzags, knotted bobbles, sudden colour shifts. But she saw the mirror of the flake. Runes reversed, unravelled, rendered harmless. All that remained was to test it. Testing a counterspell is delicate. In espionage, you wiretap first, disrupt later, same principle. She needed a sample of the active magic to see if the scarf could cancel it. The vial's residue was useless. She required a fresh flake. That meant braving the roof. Moscow rooftops after dark are kingdoms of iron frost. Yelena climbed the service ladder of an 8-story building, emerging into starlight and diesel haze. Snow billowed in slow spirals. Each flake carried the encoded sigils. She unrolled the half-finished scarf and let several crystals land on it. Immediately the stitches brightened, the yarn fibers glowing faintly like embers under ash. When she shook the scarf, the crystals disintegrated into ordinary water. A sigh left her lips. The countermatter worked. But solving a code is never the end, only the beginning of knowing who wrote it and why. She needed intel, and for that she required an active network. Directorate S had frozen her clearances, yet favors endure longer than passports. She punched an old number into her secure phone, a relic with a pull-out antenna and an encryption chipset custom-made in 1993. "Zima," she said when the call picked up. "Vechno," answered a gravelly male voice, her call and response from decades prior. "Winter. Forever." "Sergey," she said, softening. "I need a car, a burner laptop, and possibly a flamethrower." He coughed a laugh. "You think I'm still quartermaster? I teach grandchildren to ice skate." "Lyusha, listen carefully." She summarized the sigil, snowflakes, the date, the phrase. "Whoever cast this has reach. Citywide, we freeze at midnight, or worse. Time itself halts while we stay aware, trapped." Silence crackled. Sergey had lost a brother to a biological test gone wrong. He despised large-scale gambits. "I'll come. An hour." Yelena descended to pack. Needles, yarn, the prototype scarf. She slid an old Makarov pistol into her satchel. Cold iron disturbed certain enchantments and, almost as an afterthought, tucked in 2 skeins of raw, undyed wool. Unprogrammed yarn could adapt on the fly. Sergey arrived in a battered Volga that smelled of antifreeze and pine. His beard, white as hoarfrost, hid the old scar where a Lithuanian bullet had tried and failed to finish him. They clasped arms without sentiment. Time pressed. "Leads?" he asked as they drove toward the garden ring. "The sigils matched Department 13 archives. The Occult Research Unit shuttered in 91. Sarah grimaced. Some files disappeared in the chaos. Rumor said Arkady Snegarov took them. Yelena swore under her breath. Snegarov had been her opposite number once. A sorcerer scientist who believed magic must serve the state the way rockets served the cosmonauts. Expelled for conducting temporal stasis experiments on political prisoners, he vanished after the coup attempt. If he was back, the snow was his handwriting. "Where would he stage the anchor?" Sergey mused. "To freeze time across Moscow, you need a focal point. Central, symbolic, and saturated with bells." "The Kremlin," Yelena answered. "Or the clockworks beneath Spasskaya Tower. We'll never get inside by force, though we don't." She pulled a folded tourist brochure from her pocket, spots circled in pen. "There is a maintenance tunnel from the Metro 2 network, rumored to connect to the tower's sub-basement. If it still exists, we can slip in while security scans the crowds above." Seri whistled. "Metro 2 is myth." "Not to Directorate S," she replied. They parked near Borovitskaya at 3 a.m., leaving the main streets to revelers stringing fairy lights and municipal workers setting up pyrotechnics for the midnight show. In a service alley behind the State Library, Yelena located an iron hatch half buried in drift. With a pry bar and muttered expletives, they heaved it up, descending rusted rungs into stale darkness. Old Soviet power cables lined the tunnel like petrified worms. Seri's flashlight cut a thin cone ahead. Yelena followed, knitting as she walked, letting the rhythm combat the echoing dread. With every 10th stitch, she whispered a syllable of warmth, anchoring their breath against the underground chill. After a kilometer, the concrete opened into a cavernous service hall with abandoned rail tracks. Graffiti and fluorescent paint declared Diti Alapokal Elishisa, Children of the Apocalypse. And to the letters, fresh footprints marred the dust. Bootprints, military issue. "They're moving equipment," Yelena said, stooping to study the depth. "Generators, coolant lines." "Coolant for what?" Sergey asked. She shivered. "For time." They trailed the footprints to a steel door where two men in tactical coats smoked and chatted in low voices. Yelena signaled halt. Knitting needles can double as garrots at close quarters, but surprise matters. Sergei drew a tranquilizer dart fashioned from Ice his own artisanal wizardry and flicked it. The dart melted on contact with the first guard's neck, freezing him mid-blink. The second guard turned. Yelena cracked him behind the ear with a hardwood needle. Inside the door, vast machinery thrummed. Coils encircling a glass obelisk filled with swirling snowflakes. The master room, magnified. Copper conduits snaked upward through the ceiling toward the Kremlin above. At the console stood Arkady Snegurov, tall, skeletal, hair the color of old snow. His eyes flared aquamarine when he saw her. "Ah, Samoylova," he greeted. "I wondered which relic Directorate S would send." "I volunteered," she said, voice steady. "Retirement grows dull." Sergei covered their flank, pistol drawn. Yelena stepped forward, scarf draped across her arms like a ceremonial offering. "Beautiful work," Snegurov remarked, but futile. "Midnight approaches. My device is already entwined with the Moscow chimes. When the bells strike, each snowflake outside will mirror the pattern you saw. Time will suspend. Imagine centuries to solve humanity's problems, uninterrupted by politics or decay. Imagine billions trapped in a single heartbeat," she countered. "People lynching each other in frozen consciousness, unable to die." "Sacrifice is inevitable," he said with a shrug. Yelena unrolled her scarf. The pattern shimmered, pulling the fluorescent light into its weft. "You forget. Arkady's need is slow magic. But tonight, slow outruns fast." She whipped the scarf overhead, casting it like a net. The stitches unraveled mid-air, lengthening into strands of glowing yarn that wrapped around the glass obelisk. Runes met counter-runes, the air crackled with thermal shock. Frost shot across the floor, crawling toward her boots. Snegurov shouted an incantation. The snow inside the obelisk surged outward, forming a cyclone that shredded the yarn strands, then coalesced into daggers of crystal. One sliced past Yelena, cutting a bleeding furrow along her cheek. Sergei fired. Bullets ricocheted off a thaumaturgic barrier. Yelena grabbed the raw, undyed wool from her satchel. She had not programmed it, but raw yarn is possibility incarnate. She thrust one needle through the hank, tugged, and began knitting on instinct. Knit, purl, yarn over, drop loop, twist. No pattern, only resolve human will encoded in fiber. As she knitted, she spoke the oldest code word in her arsenal. Dovei, trust. The wool flared gold, absorbing the droplets of her blood. Magic obeys equivalence. Her life knit to resist another's death wish. She hurled the growing fabric under the machinery, where the copper conduit slithered. The moment the wool touched metal, it spread like molten lava, replacing the copper with organic cord that pulsed with heartbeat rhythm. The machinery's pitch changed, descending from menacing hum to plaintive whine. Snegurov's eyes widened. He lunged to yank free a circuit breaker, but Sarah tackled him. The two old men grappled, curses in one breath, theological quotes in the next. Yelena gathered her fracturing scarf. Half the runes remained intact. Half lay shredded. She needed a final knot, one decisive ciphertext. She tied the two ends around her wrists, forming a loop. Then she stepped to the control plinth and rammed both fists against the master rune interface. Pain shot up her arms. The scarf lit like midday, and through the knitwork, Yelena felt the machinery's pulse, the millions of snowflakes above singing their frozen song, each a syllable of halted time. She answered with the counter-melody, life's messy, arrhythmic beating. Snow fell from the ceiling in clumps. The obelisk cracked. Outside, far above, the Kremlin bells rang rehearsal chimes, 10 quick strikes for electricians testing circuits. The resulting resonance funneled down the copper now-wool conduits, vibrating the scarf to near combustion. "Now, Sergei!" she cried. He head-butted Snegurov, reached the emergency vent valve and spun it. Super-chilled air vented into the service hall, swirling with particular temporal magic. Yelena forced the scarf's final stitch, severing the knit loop with her teeth. The released knot shot upward like a comet through the conduit. Above Red Square, onlookers saw a single streak of crimson and blue arc across the night sky, then dissolve like a spent firework. The snowfall resumed its ordinary lazy drift. In apartments and bars, clocks hiccuped, losing 3 seconds, and then continued. No one noticed. Below ground settled. The obelisk shattered, glass sparkling over the floor. Sigurov lay unconscious, Serdia nursing a dislocated shoulder. The machinery's lights faded. Time marched on. Yelena exhaled, a sound half-laugh, half-sob. She retrieved the tatters of her scarf. Only a wrist-length braid survived, enough for a bookmark, perhaps. "You always were stubborn," Seri remarked, grimacing as he reset his shoulder. "And you always late with backup." She smiled, then approached the fallen sorcerer. His pulse fluttered. She considered finishing him. Better hearts than hers would argue for mercy. In the end, she wrapped a fragment of the wool around his wrists, binding them. Yarn, she knew, holds better than handcuffs when woven with intent. Sirens echoed from distant shafts. The Federal Protective Service finally alerted by alarms they did not comprehend. Time to leave. Seri produced a flask. They toasted in the dark. No speeches, simply the acknowledgement of having survived one more theatre of the absurd. Then they retraced their path, emerging before dawn onto a city washed pale by first light. Snow-blanketed cars and statues, yet the rainbow sheen was gone. Only ordinary water crystals remained. On the embankment where the story began, Larina paused. Fresh flakes landed on her glove, perfect, symmetrical, free of sigils. She felt both relief and melancholy, for deciphering patterns is what gave her life meaning. And now the pattern was done. What will you do with retirement now that knitting saved the world? Sergei teased. "I might try crochet," she said. "Different nuts, different possibilities." He chuckled, offering an arm. Together they walked toward the smell of coffee and black bread, two relic operatives, whose era was supposed to be over, but apparently wasn't finished with them yet. Behind them, atop the clock tower whose bells would soon greet a new year none the wiser, wind scattered the last of the coded snow into the Moskva, where it melted without a trace. Moscow would celebrate, clinking glasses under fireworks, never knowing how near eternity had brushed their shoulders now. That a grandmother's scarf had unravelled the frost of time itself,